If you're currently on summer break and you want to study ahead for the school year, or you just want to make your upcoming year a bit less stressful, this video might be helpful for you. Today, I'll be sharing my process for how I studied ahead during the summer breaks, or even during the school year. In retrospect, I actually didn't have to put in that much work, but I got massive benefits in terms of feeling less stressed during the school year, having more time for my own hobbies, and also just picking up concepts a lot more quickly. I've broken down my process into 8 steps, and I'll have timestamps linked down in the description box below. Step number 1. Before you do anything else, you first need to make sure that you have time. See if you have time to even study ahead. Now, if you're working a full-time job during summer break, this is going to be a lot harder for you, but it doesn't mean that it's not possible. You just need to be a lot more intentional about your time. But in general, you do want to see if you have the time and energy to commit to learning ahead over break. I would say that you would generally need anywhere from 5 to 15 hours per week, depending on the subject that you're working on. If the subject is generally easy, then 5 to 10 hours would be good. But like for the classes that I kind of studied ahead for in medical school, it took me anywhere from 10 to 15 hours during the week. In general, you do have a lot of time over summer break, and the amount of time you specifically need depends on what level of understanding you want to reach and what your ultimate goals are, but we'll talk about that in the future step. First, just identify that you have enough time. Now, step number 2 is to find a syllabus. This is of the most crucial importance. You need to figure out what specific topics you need to learn for the class that you want to study for. You can find this from your school website. Maybe the teacher has the syllabus linked on his own website or her own website. Or if you can't find anything, your best source is actually Go for Seniors. Ideally, you want to get your hands on a list of lectures that will be covered in this course. And based on these names of the lectures, you'll be able to figure out which topics you need to learn in advance. After you've found a syllabus, step number 3 is to identify fun resources that can help you learn ahead. Now, emphasis on the word fun. You want to find resources that are enjoyable for you to use. The first thing that comes to mind for me are animated or illustrated videos. I would highly recommend that you stay away from textbooks. At least don't use textbooks as your primary learning material source, because textbooks are very dry, they're very boring to read, and if I'm trying to learn something using a textbook, I'm more likely than not to just give up. So I would recommend that you find videos instead. I am kind of like an auditory learner, so I really like it when I'm listening to a video that explains the topic well for me. For most high school science chem courses, I would recommend Khan Academy or Organic Chemistry Tutor. In medical school, I've also heard great things about osmosis and 3D medicine. And if you're not sure about which specific resources to use for your class, again, ask seniors. The bottom line is to just find something that you will find fun to use. Don't find something that's super boring, or at least don't heavily rely on something that's going to be super boring, because you'll just be sabotaging your learning process. After you've identified which resources to use, step number 4 is to block out time for learning. I would recommend around 1 to 2 hours every day, ideally in the morning. You have to be strategic about what time you pick to study. Figure out when your energy levels are at its highest and what is the optimal time for you to be learning new material. For me, this is first thing in the morning. So I usually did all my studying first thing in the morning, especially over the summer. During the school year, it was a bit harder, but it would always be the first thing I did after I came home from school, because that was when I was still energized and receptive to learning new information. If you're going to be really busy, either during the school year or during your summer break, this is when you have to identify pockets of time. I recommend that you check out my video on how I make my commutes productive, because when you're busy, I think that the best time for you to study is actually during commutes, as long as it's safe and you have enough time on your commute. For me, I do a lot of studying during my commute because I can actually focus, and it's a big pocket of time that would just get lost otherwise. In general though, block out a specific time for you to study and try to block out a consistent time, as in choose the same time to study every single day. so that it builds a habit, and getting into this routine of studying at the same time every single day will become a lot easier. Step number 5 for studying ahead is to set goals about your learning. You need to set goals on what you want to get done ultimately at the end of your summer break or at the end of this month. For instance, say you're studying for a biochemistry class. Maybe your goal is to learn all the pathways by the end of your summer break. Then set this as your overarching goal and put a deadline on it. Your next step is to break this goal down into smaller sub-goals or sub-tasks, and also set sub-deadlines for each of these corresponding tasks. So part of learning biochemistry would be learning about carbohydrate metabolism and protein metabolism and nucleic acid metabolism. These are different sub-goals that contribute to your overarching goal, and you need to break this down and plan for each goal, because if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Having these sub-goals is really important to making sure that you stay on track and on task on reaching your final destination. And if you have an overarching goal of, oh, I want to cover all these biochemistry topics by the end of this month, but you have nothing for like weekly goals, then it's very easy for you to kind of fall off the wagon. Your next step is to create a streak. This is step 6, and this is, I find, the most important way for me to learn ahead during my summer break. I find that building a streak is so helpful for helping me stay on track and make consistent progress every single day. In order to build this streak, you need to first identify a habit. Identify a habit that is one, measurable, and non-trivial. Now, what is something that is trivial? Something that would be trivial for me is just reading one page of a textbook. Reading one page of a textbook, yes, I'm kind of learning, but it's not going to help me make significant progress towards my final goal. Something that isn't trivial is maybe doing 300 Alki flashcards, okay? That is going to ensure that I remember, learn, and memorize consistent information. This is something that's non-trivial for one, and it's measurable. These are the habits you want to be forming in order to make sure that you're on task and on track to reach your final goal. When you're trying to decide on what metric to use though, you do want to take a step back and figure out what level of understanding you want to reach over this break when you're studying ahead. I like to break this down into 3 levels. Level 1 would just be understanding. This means just understanding the general concept. This might be just counting the number of videos you watch. You don't have to actively test yourself. You're not super stressed about, oh, I need to remember this. No, I just need to understand the topic. It's okay if I forget, but at least when it comes time for school, it won't be your first exposure to the topic. And I find that sometimes this is enough. I just need to kind of have a good foundation, framework, understanding of how this topic works. Level 2 would be to aim for understanding and learning. Now, the difference between these two is that this level also requires that you remember it. It means being a bit more active about what you're doing in order to learn. So maybe this is watching a video, but also making your own notes along the way. Have something that's a bit more active, still generally easy to do, but something that's active to make sure that you're consolidating the information you learn. Level 3 would be to understand, to learn, and to apply. Now this is when you want to go full out, I'm going to self-teach myself this topic. This means you watch the video, you make notes, and then you go find that super dry and big textbook and you do the practice questions that are at the end of the chapter for the relevant topic that you're trying to learn. Quiz yourself using those textbook questions, or find a case study textbook and do those case studies. This is making sure that you can apply the information you learn, you fully understand it, and in a sense, when you're going to lectures during class, during the school year, that is just going to be a good review for you. You already know the concept well. Now, for me personally, I ultimately aim for hitting a level 1, maybe a level 2 when I'm learning ahead. I find that if I'm aiming for a level 3, it's very easy for me to just feel very unmotivated because it feels like a lot of work. But level 1 or level 2 is very easy. It's very low threshold for the amount of work I need, but I still reap pretty good results. Just keep these 3 levels of understanding in mind when you're trying to find a metric to track and create a streak. As you're tracking this metric, building a streak is really helpful because you'll kind of start comparing yourself and you don't want to break your streak. If I know that I've studied consistently for the past 4 days, today, even if I'm feeling very tired, I will still get myself to go do the work because I just don't want to lose that streak. It's kind of like feeling competitive against myself, but I find it to be very, very helpful in helping you make progress. As you're building your streak, you also want to make sure that you're having fun. And this leads me to step number 7. Reward yourself with something fun after studying. This reinforces in your mind that studying doesn't have to be a pain. Associate something that's fun after you're done studying in order to make the entire experience more enjoyable. Maybe after you're done studying, you let yourself watch a Chinese drama. That's usually what ended up happening for me. I would study and then afterwards I would let myself binge watch 1 or 2 episodes of a Chinese drama. Or maybe it's getting a nice snack, making yourself a nice cup of tea. Or having something to snack on after you eat. I'm not sure if that's the healthiest way to have a relationship with your food, but it was very enjoyable for me. I've done all of these things, and in general, you want to find something that's fun to do that kind of just gives you a bit of motivation to keep doing when you're struggling on getting started. You tell yourself that after I get this done, I can do this other task that I find really enjoyable, and it will motivate yourself to keep going. Now that we're on the topic of motivation, this brings me to step number 8, understanding why you're studying ahead. This draws a lot on intrinsic motivation. Instead of motivating yourself from extrinsic factors, you'll feel internally motivated. If you understand why you're doing this, it'll give you a lot of motivation to just keep going. These are a few reasons I gave myself, and in a sense, they're kind of like mental gymnastics I play with myself, but here we are. Number 1, it makes the school year less stressful because it means you can slack off. I definitely did this back in year 2 of medical school. I learned a lot of biochemistry pathways in advance, and it ended up meaning that I could slack off during the school year, or just put my time and focus on different hobbies I had instead of spending 24/7 on learning and studying for school. I know personally that I also do a very bad job with keeping up with lectures, and studying ahead during the summer break meant that it was okay if I had fell behind on lectures. This kind of gave me a peace of mind, and knowing how I usually function during the school year gave me motivation to study ahead during the summer break because I know I'm very bad with keeping up with lectures. Additionally, understand that studying can actually be kind of fun, especially when you don't have the pressure of a test or an exam coming up. You're studying just because the topic is interesting. Find something that's interesting about the topic, and that will be a lot of motivation for you to keep going because you genuinely enjoy what you're learning. I find this when I'm learning a lot of physiology or pathology. I just find the topic intrinsically interesting, and I don't need too much motivation to keep going. Another reason for studying ahead during the summer is to actually try out different study techniques, especially if you're transitioning from high school to college. It is helpful for you to figure out what's the best way for me to learn. Okay, do I learn from making notes, or do I learn from doing question banks? Do I learn from watching videos, or do I learn from just reading? Just treat everything like an experiment and see how it goes. Finally, and the most helpful motivator for myself was to understand that my end goal was not to memorize everything. My end goal was just not go into lectures blind. My end goal was to just have a good preview of the information so that when it was taught in class, I would be like, oh, I remember learning about that. It's actually not that confusing. And that was enough for me. These are the ways that I motivated myself. I'm sure that you can come up with ways for you, and feel free to share it down in the comment section down below. This sums up the 8 steps I used for studying ahead over my summer break. To recap, number 1, see if you have the time. Step 2 would be to find a syllabus. Step 3 is to identify resources. Step 4 is to time block in your calendar and make time for it. Step 5 is to set a goal for yourself. Step 6 is to create a streak. Step 7 is to reward yourself with something. And finally, step 8 is to understand why you're studying ahead. I hope you find this video helpful. If you did, you might find this video also interesting because based on the YouTube algorithm, it would recommend this video to you. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye!